Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, the place for internet technology professionals whose work-life balance plan has imploded. We are here to provide solutions that will help the IT pro live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hi, this is Joanne Victoria with another episode of the Sanity Project podcast. I partner with IT professionals in telecommunications, technology, entertainment, and mass media whose work-life balance plan has imploded and who want more success, more confidence, more fun, and more inner peace. Our guest today is going to help you with more inner peace, and wait till you hear what he has to say. Our guest today is Reneau Peurifoy. Reneau holds a master's degree in counseling and is the author of 4 books. His first book, Anxiety, Phobias and Panic, has gone through 3 revisions and sold over 200,000 copies. Reneau was in private practice for 20 years as a marriage and family therapist, specializing in anxiety disorders. He retired from private practice to teach at a local college in Sacramento, California, and is now spending his time writing, speaking, and seeing people with anxiety-related problems as a pastoral counselor. He has also developed a YouTube channel that features videos on practical life skills, and you'll be seeing his social media links at somewhere on this page, wherever you're looking at it. And his website is whyemotions.com. That's whyemotions.com. And today, Reneau will be speaking to us about how to identify the 2 quiet messages of anxiety that are often missed. Welcome to the show, Reneau Peurifoy.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. Anxiety is a huge issue today, especially with my clients. And
it seems to be getting worse.
It is. You know, it depends on where our focus goes. If we're distracted by shiny objects all the time, you could be insane. But I'm sure you'll give information to our listeners about how to stay away from the fray.
Right. Well, one simple thing is just turn off the TV.
That's my action. I just change the channel. I don't pay any attention to anything about news.
Yeah, so much crazy stuff going on right now.
Because it's not news. And I have to live my life, and I have to have as little stress and anxiety as possible. Yeah. So what do you mean by quiet messages?
Well, we often focus on the surface, and anxiety is just a message. It's a message that you have some business to take care of. And oftentimes it's things that you don't want to deal with. And so because you're not dealing with them, it generates anxiety. So the two big ones is, one is just stress management. It's a lot of times anxiety just is saying you're doing too much. You got too many irons in the fire. You need to sit back and reevaluate your life. And a lot of times with my clients, I give them a little checklist. And so the first thing is, of course, what are your physical needs? Are you just sick, hungry, tired, burning the candle at both ends? Have you taken on more things that you really need to do? Mental stuff, is there a decision I need to make or I'm putting off? Relationship stuff is really big. Is there something going on relationship-wise that I'm not dealing with? And then there's this whole, what I like to call spiritual existential side. A lot of people don't like to call it spiritual, so I call it existential. What am I here for? What is life all about? Those questions, which oftentimes in our modern times we don't really take a look at, but which really define a lot of how we react to events. So those are some of the quiet messages I look at.
That's interesting. When you say spiritual existential side, I was speaking to somebody yesterday. I was driving doing some errands, and I was in the library to pick up some books because that's where I get my books. Mm-hmm. And I was a little perturbed and spoke to a person there in the library that I usually have meaningful conversations with. And one of the things I discussed with her is how irritated I was because I get irritated when I'm hungry, and I must have been hungry. It's one
Well,
of the basic physical needs that I always have to take care of. I'm really good at being
that's the sick, hungry, tired combination, right?
Yeah. And I was saying that they were talking on the radio about, do you believe in God? And how would you, does whatever about that? And I thought, everybody is old enough right now and has been on this earth long enough, we would think, to have absorbed enough information to make decisions about most anything, as long as they have values that they align with. And why are people making such a big deal about everything today? And it just happened to pop up with me at that time. And it's maybe because I'm getting older and hopefully a little bit wiser, but it's like some things are just no longer important to me. And maybe I need your counseling, but some things are just no longer important to me. Not necessarily about God. That just sort of kicked another fry in my brain. But
that whole question about, why am I here? What really is the purpose or meaning of life? How do you get to be happy? What really causes you to be fulfilled? And we don't think very deeply about those things. And yet they really determine to a large degree, our anxieties and how we go through life, how we look at stuff. In the old days, people had more time to think about that type of thing. But nowadays, we're just so busy with all of the data input that's coming at us. We got our phones going on. We got the TV going on. We're busy going here, busy going there. And we don't have time to sit back and take a look at what's really important to me.
Well, for me, and that's the only person I can refer to, my sense is that we're all here to contribute. And we have a reason for being here, and it can be very simple, and most people make it too complicated because they think of why they are here and how they manifest it as the same thing, and it's not. If we are here to serve, that's the premise that I have. If we're here to serve, you could serve by selling vanilla ice cream or by making the ice cream, a good one. And, and happiness is a choice, or it should be, I think.
Well, there's three areas of your life really that determine, how happy you are. One is relationship. We are relational beings, and if you don't have meaningful relationships, you get really twisted after a while. And it's true.
Yeah.
And we live such isolated lives now. We got our little garage door opener. We click, we go in. We got, things turn on automatically for us. We can go a whole day without having a meaningful contact with another human being. And it really, part of the anxiety and things that you see nowadays is the fact that people have become so isolated. And then the second thing is purpose. We need a reason for getting up. When you have something that strong, some project you're working on or something, time goes by fast, things are light. Having some purpose you're working, some reason to get up in the morning is important. And then the third one, of course, is this thing we started off talking about, this whole existential, spiritual side. When life goes sideways, you have some way of looking at it that puts things into perspective for you. But when you see people who've had some really tragic event take place and yet they come out of it reasonably intact, you'll find that usually they have some kind of belief system that is their rock. They have usually some relationship that helps to pull them through, and that's what kind of gets them through that situation. But a lot of people nowadays have never really, considered those types of things, or they have, like I said, the very poor relationships. We used to have extended families and, people all around us that we knew, and so we had lots of people we could rely on. And
right.
That's one of the areas that we're very impoverished nowadays.
And there was usually multi-generational people under one roof.
Exactly.
And that doesn't exist. That's why I always think that volunteering always helps. If you've hit a brick wall and can't move forward, volunteer with a group of strangers and you will see what you're made of. I've tried that a couple of times too, now that I think about it. So how can people want to avoid being anxious, and what about the people who are not willing to look at, let's say, something other than spiritual existential side, and just aren't willing to look at what it is? I'm stressed out. I'm angry. It's somebody else's fault. But they're a mess. I mean, you could tell.
It's a difficult question because we give you 10 different answers for that. But I think, again, starting off to realize that anxiety is a normal part of life. Anxiety is simply saying something is going on there's a problem out there you need to address. So I think addressing what the problem is the first step. And like I said, with my clients, I go through a checklist, just starting off with physical stuff. Have I just loaded too much stuff on myself? That's a very common thing for people to do. The whole idea of, is there a decision? It's amazing how many people have difficulty with a decision. So, well, I just don't want to think about it. Well, if you don't think about it, it's going to keep pushing at you. And sometimes that's where the anxiety is coming from. So you need to sit down and maybe take a look at those decisions and come up with, some kind of a game plan for what I'm going to do. It kind of gets us, the whole idea is if you have a worry, warriors, people who worry a lot. One of the things that they often tend to do is what we call catastrophic thinking. If they come up with the worst scenarios and they start replaying them in their mind, and pretty soon that becomes their reality. So I like to tell them, okay, well, let's sit down. Let's take a look first at what are the odds that this terrible thing is going to happen? And then, and be realistic, because oftentimes their first response is, well, I know it's going to happen, right? And so you have to take a look at in your past experience, how many times has that happened to you? And let me take an extreme example, okay? Mm-hmm. I work a lot with people with panic disorder, and one of their fears is often, I'm going to faint, right? Oh, shoot, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn that off. Let me do that right now. Yeah. Okay, yeah, put that there. Okay, so one of the fears is often, I think I'm going to faint. So I'll ask them, how many times have you fainted in the past? Well, I've never fainted. Okay, so your initial response that I'm probably going to faint is not based in reality. So based in reality, how likely is this to occur? And of course, the next thing is you want to take a look at how bad would it be if that happened? So like with something like fainting, how bad would that happen? Or to take an office situation, I'm going to give a speech and I might get read or I might say something wrong. But that might be a more common one. What if I make a mistake and people laugh at me, right? So, okay, it's very likely that you might make a mistake. I mean, I make mistakes all the time when I talk. When you see somebody make a mistake in a meeting, do you sit there and laugh at them? Well, no, not really. I just think, well, they made a mistake. Well, and part of that fear comes from junior high school, right?
Sure.
Where peer responses were, peer was your whole world, right? And so if somebody made a mistake, you would ridicule and you'd laugh at them, all that type of stuff. But now we're in the adult world. And quite frankly, nobody cares about you.
That's what I say. People, and I tell them, people don't care.
Yeah, you make a mistake. It's like when you see somebody say, oh, they made a mistake. Well, that's kind of silly. Oh, well, now you're back onto your most important topic, me, right?
Yeah.
So other people are going to respond to you that way. So don't worry about it. They're going to forget about it. It's not like it's going to be broadcast on the evening news. Reneau made a mistake at the meeting today, right? That's not going to happen. And sometimes being absurd helps you put it in more perspective. So what's the likelihood it's going to happen? Then let me come up with a plan for preventing it. What can I do to prevent it? I can have some notes I can prepare. And if it did happen, what are you going to do? That would be the next step, right? So in the case of a mistake, well, I can just say, well, I made a mistake. Okay, let me correct that. In fact, let me just tell on myself for a moment. When I first started doing public speeches and stuff, I was terrified of making mistakes, and I'd get all embarrassed and I'd freeze up and stuff. And then I finally decided, okay, I'm going to change tactic. And so when I'd forget what I was going to say, I'd say, wait, hey gang, my brain just turned to jelly. I forgot what I want to say, but it'll come to me in a moment. And I would change topics. And sure enough, a minute or two later, it would come to me and I would just pick up. And I found that solved the whole problem, as I just would tell people I forgot or whatever happened or admit when I said something wrong, and no more problem from that point on. That's part of becoming more human, right?
True. And I think having your audience on your side is really important. In listening what you have to say about a panic disorder or somebody fainting or the catastrophic stuff too, because I'm familiar with that with people in my realm, shall we say.
Yep.
But a lot of it sounds like control.
Oh, yeah.
It's all down to control, and control comes from what? Fear?
Well, a lot of times
the need to control.
A lot of times in social situations, if it comes from self-image, a fear of what people are going to think, so I better control the situation so I always look good, right? If I make mistakes, people are going to think poorly of me, and I can't have that. So a lot of it has to do again with that self-image things. We talk a lot about self-esteem, and that's really the wrong direction, because that's just a small part of your self-image. And self-image is the more broader concept. Who am I? How do I relate to the world? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? That sort of thing. So how much you esteem yourself or not is just a small piece of that whole puzzle. So self-image is, I think, a better way to look at it.
I think that's important. And I think there's some sort of a thread going through what you're saying about not wanting to look bad in front of others. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned junior high, and I just think that a lot of people are still in high school as grown-up bodies.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all they have to relate to.
Well, it gets down to something that I like to use with people, which is core beliefs. We have a set of core beliefs about, who I am, what relationships are all about, what the world is all about, and then those existential things, what life is about and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. And most of our core beliefs were established when we were quite young. And, it dawned to me a long time ago, and it was well, how come I didn't think about this earlier? Most adults are walking around with a set of core beliefs that a little kid came up with.
Correct.
And that explains so much of the crazy stuff you see, really, when you think of it in those terms. And most of us never sit down and really think about what are some of those core beliefs about myself, and maybe let's bring them up into a more adult level, because sometimes we have some real irrational stuff down there.
Yeah, I think that's the core belief search is something that everybody needs to go through at one time or another, if not more often, mm-hmm. more than once, because once you reveal one, you reveal two, you reveal three, you reveal four, and we learned it from our parents. And I remember mm-hmm. there's one little story I used to share with some groups when I used to do more speaking and more group work, retreats and stuff, mm-hmm. is, the bride, for example, the young bride, buys a roast at the store. God,
all right.
When we were still eating meat, and which I still do. But she buys this roast, and then she cuts it in half and puts mm-hmm. two halves in the oven. And the husband goes, "Why are you doing that?" And she says, "Well, that's what my mother did." And the husband goes, "I don't understand that." And they asked the mother, and she said, "Why did I do it? Because we had a small oven." Yeah. So it was circumstances created that. But we copy what we see. It's certainly what we see easier than what we hear, because my parents did it, and they showed me the way. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we go through, I'm sure you have some clients go through the issues with their parents, going, why did I pay attention to what they showed me and told me?
Well, but it's just the way we are. Little kids, they learn by example, and they watch the people around them, and they copy it. Sometimes they learn behaviors to adjust those, to get what they want out of their people around them. And we just keep doing it because we never think about it too much. I like to, and sometimes it's what we call state-specific learning. When you learn something in a specific state, you tend to revert to those behaviors when you're in that state. And one of the best examples is how you treat other people. You're more adult at work usually than you are in your primary relationship, mm-hmm. especially when you first, develop that. As you get older, hopefully that changes, right? And the reason for that is real simple. You learn about intimacy in primary relationships when you're very little, and you learn about work when you're older. And so you tend to be more adult-like at work, and then you come home and you kind of revert back into those behaviors you learned when you were a little kid and do the stuff that, your parents did to each other and what was going on in your family. And unless you do something to change, that'll just sometimes go on for years and years in a lifetime.
So how do you help your clients, patients, however you refer to them, mm-hmm. change?
Well, the first step is just identifying what's going on. It's a little bit of self-awareness goes a long ways. And pain oftentimes is the thing that helps you identify that stuff that's going on that you need to address, right? Anxiety, pain, however you want to talk about it.
Right.
So once you identify, I'm always crabbing at the wife or whatever. Okay, so I wonder why I'm crabbing at the wife all the time. And you sit down and you start taking a look at, well, what was going on in my family? Well, my dad always crabbed at my mom, And so then you start thinking, well, I think I'm just reliving those same behaviors that I learned while I was growing up. And then comes the hard part, right? So what do I do about it? Well, okay. You identify where this happens in my life and what kind of things trigger this behavior. So for me, it was, whenever I felt like I was being criticized or something, right? And so once I started recognizing that, it felt like my mom, and so I said, well, okay, my wife is not my mom. So next time I start feeling like that, I need to just shut up, first of all, and take a moment to bring myself into the present. Because what happens is we do something I call time tunnel. It's like we go back and we become that little kid, in the past. And we need to take a moment to say, okay, what's happening? What's real? And then, okay, what's happening is I'm feeling like I want to get defensive and crab a little bit. And what's real is we're just talking about going out and what restaurant to go to. Okay, so let's come back into reality. And you can do that very quickly in your mind.
Sure.
At first, it might be you do it like later that day or the next day when you think about it. But then pretty soon you start in that moment, you start to catch yourself. And that's the whole thing, is identifying where does this happen and what is that behavior that seems to trigger it, or what is the behavior that I do. And so just remind yourself whenever I find myself crabbing, close your mouth, take a moment to think about stuff. And it's kind of similar to what you do with, conflict resolution and stuff. Sometimes the start is just taking a moment to take a deep breath and, come back into reality here.
So what advice, I know you've given lots of points, and I'm going to note some of them in the show quotes, but I can't note all of them. So right now for our listening audience, which really has more than just the IT professionals, other people have snuck on and downloaded my podcast. If people could do one thing today, maybe two things, if they could do two things today to alleviate anxiety or to notice it when it's showing up, what would you suggest that they do?
I think the first thing is ask yourself, so what is the message that my anxiety is bringing to me? What am I worried about? Is that a real thing? And a lot of times it is, and if I'm just doing a lot of worry, is there, let me go through my checklist. Let me go take a look at, am I doing too much? Am I sick, hungry, tired? Am I, if I've been avoiding something? Is there something relationship going on? And that's a big one, because a lot of times people don't want to deal with relationship issues, especially boundary issues, and those would be probably the main areas to take a look at. Because every time I've talked with somebody, usually one of those things will show up. If it's a real issue, then maybe I need to sit down and make some plans. Maybe I've been doing a lot of catastrophic thinking about, what if this happens and this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Well, let me sit down and do a realistic evaluation of what might happen, how I can avoid it or how I can prevent it, and then what can I do if it did happen? What are my alternative steps I can take? It's planning, really.
So when you give people, this direction, how long do you tell them to work on this? I mean, it can't be done in one day and one time in 1 5-minute period. So do you tell them it's best to practice this every day, all day long, for 3 weeks or a month, or what is the guidance there?
It's something that you do cyclically. A lot of times I write these little summary sheets for clients I'm working with, and we'll have an issue and we kind of summarize, here's what caused it, here's where it gets triggered, here's what I can tell myself, and here's what I can do about it. So we come up with a little 4-part summary sheet. And I say, okay, work on it for about a week, pull it out once a day, just look at your little checklist or your summary sheet, and then put it away. A month or two down the road, pull it out again, take a look at it for a day or, for a few days, maybe a week, then put it away. And after about the third cycle, usually people find it starts to internalize, sometimes quicker. It depends on how big the issue is and, what's all involved with it. Because sometimes these things get tangled into a whole lot of stuff from the past, and sometimes they're pretty simple.
It sounds like great advice. I know that sounds mundane, but I really mean it, because our listening audience needs this information, and you have provided a lot of it. So first, I'm going to say to the audience, share this podcast with anyone you know, and re-listen to it over and over again, because one listen is not going to be enough. And when you go to iTunes, please give this podcast and our guest, Reneau Peurifoy, 5 stars. And if you want to give 5 stars on the podcast itself, the Sanity Project podcast, Mazel Tov. I will take that. And but more important to the guest, write a little review. Write a little review. It helps along the way. You have no idea when somebody's big name shows up how much that will click through. And you can also go to my website, askjoannevictoria.com. That's AskJoannevictoria.com. And check out my latest self-study program, the Be Your Authentic Self program. It's a complete suite of PDFs, audios, and videos for $297, which may sound like a lot, but it's probably worth at least 10 times that much. If you have any questions about this podcast, please email me at askjoannevictoria@gmail.com. I want to thank Reneau Peurifoy for being here today. We could probably talk for another hour without running out of tips.
Oh, yeah. It's a broad topic. There's so much stuff that gets entangled with it. But thank you so much for having me on your program. It's just been a delight.
I appreciate that. The book, one of the books is Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery. Where are your books available, Reneau?
On Amazon, and they're both in hardback as well as PDF, Mobi. Smashwords also has them. So Smashwords has a lot of the different electronic versions as well as Amazon.
Okay, people, you have no reason not to get a copy of one of his books. The first book was Anxiety, Phobias and Panic. It's gone through 3 revisions, so it's already sold over 200,000 copies, and you can add your number to the list. I thank you again, Reneau, for being here today, and I have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoannevictoria.com and continue the conversation on my podcast page. And get a free copy of my book, The True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. That's AskJoannevictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.